was it like to be you? What was it like to be you in all this stuff coming up? And you're seeing this crisis happen. You see us losing that you would probably lose everything. Would you share a little bit about that? Just kind of the building up to when you released that video?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sarah. I know we just started the recording, but before the recording, for anyone that's going back and watch this, we did introductions, great group of people and veterans and first responders in here. So appreciate all the people that are in this group. So, what it's like to be me is an interesting question. I think what a lot of people don't understand. So let's just use a second video. I made a second video and I was on an abandoned school bus. I have that school bus on a farm because I'm partnered with a nonprofit that does veteran suicide awareness. And we were doing it outside around campfires, and we didn't know, we wanted some shelter, and I didn't have enough money to put a house on the farm. So we got old school buses and rehabbed them so that we had a place to sit down and tell stories. So I was very keyed in on the suicide rate of veterans and talking to them. Me personally, I decided a long time ago that I'm never going to be a victim about anything. And I think oftentimes people can fall into that. I don't care what group of people it is. And veterans are no different. Oftentimes veterans will come back and subscribe to the victim mentality. I chose to go to combat. I came back from combat and had some issues, but I didn't say that I was a victim because of it. You got issues, you go get help, but you keep moving forward. And I say that only to say, I decided a long time ago I was never going to commit suicide either. And no matter how hard it was, I was going to keep pushing forward. Next day is always a new day. So going through everything that I was going through, lost my job, my retirement. We decided my marriage fell apart. We were selling my house. I was living in a motel for a while. It was very, very dark times. But when there's shame, I think it might be a little bit different. At the end of the day, I knew, or I believed, that what I was doing was right. And even though everyone was calling me crazy and coming at me, I'm the strong guy, and I believed what I was saying. And so I just knew I was going to keep putting one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward. And so that brings me to today. I mean, I believe what I said, and I stand by it, and I haven't apologized for it. I broke rules to say it, and I was held accountable for them, as I should have been. But the military, when those service members die, there's no bringing those service members back. But what we can do is prevent the same mistakes from consistently happening. And that only happens by timely assessment of failure, honest assessment of failure. And it just isn't happening today. And I felt like there wasn't anyone else that was going to say it. So I said it.
So, when we were talking before too, it was really interesting when you were talking about kind of going through this process of writing your book. What was that like for you, actually writing your book about this whole experience?
I've never wrote a book. I wrote a master's paper that took me probably 7 months. It was like a 60-page paper. And it's funny that this book's like 270 pages, and I wrote it in like 6 weeks. A little bit of a different writing style when you're telling your personal story. There was some research in it, but mostly it was just me going through my thoughts. And the secret to a book is discipline and solitude, which I had. I was in a condo by myself, and I just stayed disciplined, and I got up every morning and started writing, wrote, 8-9 hour days, and got through it in 6 weeks. And so, I initially actually got a ghostwriter, and the way the ghostwriter works is you audibly go through each chapter. So you like talk through it, and then they submit you the written chapters, and it wasn't good. It was surface deep. And I spent like 4 days just kicking back the introduction back and forth to where I realized there's too much of my deeper thoughts to allow someone else to write this. So I ended up just writing it myself. But I will say going through the audio portion and then getting some type of written feedback back was helpful. And so I did use that as probably a process. So if I were ever to write a book again, that's probably something I'd do. And, I'm not a writer, but I think I can write at a level that relates to American people. And so it can't, it's a bestseller right now. So it's doing well. It's number 6 this week in nonfiction books, according to the AP, Associated Press. So there is some indications that it is connecting with the American people.
That's great. Congratulations. I mean, it must feel good to have your voice heard, that people are listening, and especially with everything that you've sacrificed to speak out. We were talking about Jerry Maguire. That's what it reminded me of. Jerry Maguire putting out his whole heart and how this thing could be fixed, and then all the consequences that came for it. But of course, you doing that is a much greater scale. And I really loved what you said when we had talked initially about this book was like a love letter.
Yeah. Well, there's like so much emotion in this. And so, I wrote a bunch of stuff when I was in jail, and I went back and read it, and I was like, oh, I was just angry. So it was almost like an emotional thing that I had to go through, because I was so mad, because there's so much betrayal that, someone else said it earlier, love is a strong emotion. The only thing that drives out fear and anger is really love. And I love the military. I love the Marines. And so it took me I had to wait until March, because I got out on Christmas Eve, that long to almost go through an emotional process where I was in a headspace where I could write the book and not just be like, fuck you, like I had to be calm down and write it for the right reasons. And exactly right. I wanted it to come off like a love letter. Now, if you go through it, I illustrate some of the betrayal, because I think it's important to understand some of those. I didn't go into a lot of them. I tried very hard not to come off as vindictive, but at the same time, the best disinfectant to problems is sunlight in a lot of ways. So it was honest. It was hard to read it sometimes. It was cathartic to write it. Probably the hardest thing for me after I wrote it, there's this editing process of like, you have to reread it, probably 30 times. I mean, that emotionally took a lot out of me. Like, reading my story over and over was a gut punch. And so by the end of April, I never looked at the book again. I was like, get it away from me. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to see it. I want to like move on in my life a little bit. And now, from April to September, it's easier. I've moved on. I've got all my stuff out of storage. I'm in a better place with my personal life. So yeah, all of that.
I just want to let you know that I'm just a police officer. My father-in-law was a colonel, and you had people at that level that he supported you. He was pissed. He was a lifelong, he was a colonel. They were going to offer him a 1-star for another 5 years. I didn't know you, but I knew enough that you had support from people like me. And I'm just a police officer, and people love you. And hey, you know what, brother? You are the epitome of what a man is. And you're epitome of what a soldier is. And you had a colonel that had your back, and you had a cop.
He's a Marine, not a soldier. Just had to throw that in there. We are not soldiers.
Hey, well, you know what? I've got a head injury, so you know what, dude? I'm just saying, brother, I supported you and I followed you, and I'm proud of you, and God bless you. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you.
I just want you to know that for what it's worth.
I appreciate you.
People
well, I think like most, I don't know, maybe not most. I'm an introvert, whether you realize that or not. So when I go to all these events with people, it emotionally exhausts me. I would prefer to just read and write and be in my own place. So that's why I have the farm, so I could just get away from people and shoot my guns and ride my 4-wheelers. And so the easiest thing once I got out of the military was just drop off the grid. But I felt like with everything I had gone through, I had an obligation to see this all the way to the end and keep walking the path. And so I'm trying to be strong enough to just keep doing what I'm doing. But it takes a toll. So I've got a book signing in Jacksonville, North Carolina tomorrow, right? And there'll probably be hundreds of people, and it'll be hours of me talking to everyone, and everyone's got a story, and I really want to talk to all of them. But on the flip side is that just takes a lot out of me too. So, I get done with these things and I'm just drained emotionally and physically. And so, do I want to keep doing this? So I gave myself until Christmas, and I'm booked until Christmas. And so I'm going to different towns. I'm trying to meet with all the people I dropped off the media there for a little bit, very intentionally. So from like April to June, you didn't hear anything from me. I mean, I literally didn't do any shows and was gone. But now I'm doing the mainstream media. I'm doing every podcast that reaches out to me. Because podcasts, I think there's a lot of power. They're like small town halls. It's people, you can see right here, we're able to engage with each other, and I'm able to be a little bit more open than I am in a 1 minute, 2 minute soundbite on a Fox News Newsmax. So I'm gonna walk this path for the next 6 months, promoting the book, and then January 23 is really where I decide what's next, and then I reassess the battlefield and decide what I want to do with my life.
Oh, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing. I just wanted to see how you were doing. That was my part in this. I know that people are itching to get in here into this conversation, so I want to open it up to everyone. We did have Scott Mann on last week, and it really brought up a lot of topics. And I saw too how much people were affected. I mean, I knew people were. I knew, I think for civilians too, the whole Kabul withdrawal, anybody who was in tune with it at all was very impacted by it. But to see, my brothers and sisters in the military and the veterans, and see how much it impacted them through the conversation, I'm really glad that you could be here to continue this conversation. So anyway, you guys raise, where to raise your hand so I can keep track of you. I don't want to miss anybody. So Paul, you have a comment?
I do. Stuart, first of all, I truly admire the courage that it took and the intestinal fortitude that it took to do what you did. And I will never, ever forget that. And I think that what you did yesterday was an absolute class act with the event in Kentucky. I'll leave it at that. If you want to talk about it, fine. But I just thought that was priceless. And I appreciate it very much.
Yeah. So what he's referring to, the book signing I had in Florence, Kentucky, one of the Marines that was injured at the Abbey Gate in Kabul came and visited me. And, it's a pretty young female that's about to turn 21 next week that is a warrior, right? Like, this young female wanted to go to war, put herself in a position to do all the things that we do as Marines. And it's hard for you're not to just, want to give her a hug or support her in any way that you can. And then I also had, not in that post, I had multiple moms and sisters and husbands that lost people over the last 2 decades, not just Afghanistan, but Iraq or all the things, and kind of felt like their loved one had been lost and were hugging me. And but I go back to, I'm kind of introverted. So like, hugging all these people, it takes a lot out of me. Right. But then I go back to, I feel like it's important, we are a group, but that all have connections that, I think these things are important. So that's why we keep doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Johnny.
Hey, did you grow up in Cincinnati, Lieutenant Colonel?
Yeah, I moved there in 7th grade. So I went to high school at Anderson High School, and then I went to the University of Cincinnati.
I'm from Cincinnati. I went to Lakota.
No way, right on.
Dude, I just posted something. My uncle has a memorial, a tower, the Ron Walker Tower at UC. That's my uncle. I just tagged you in the post.
Awesome.
So when you get off, look on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Cool, I'll check it out. Thanks, man.
Yeah. So Florence, y'all.
That's right.
I do have one quick question, unrelated that relates to this. Number one, so as an enlisted Marine, it's kind of instilled in us not to trust officers, no matter what. Like it's pretty much, when you're an enlisted Marine, an officer is self-serving, only wants to be promoted, doesn't give two shits about you or your life, cares more about the equipment and everything else. One of the things that really stood out when everything first broke And it really, I was like, holy cow, like this guy, I can't believe this dude just actually said what he said. And I wasn't surprised they put you in the brig. I was like, wow, an officer going in a brig with one of us, you know, like this is something else. What, like, I guess what tipping point did it get to? Like, what was that the straw that broke the camel's back for you to break ranks with the cookie cutter officers of the United States Marine Corps? Is that a fair question?
Yeah. So
like
I guess no, I'll answer it for sure. The question's easy to answer, but I'll start with, you know, the sentiment of enlisted versus officers. You know, I hope it's not as bad as you described. There are reasons why I can see what you're saying. And in the book, I think part of the problem right now, the divide between enlisted and officers, goes back to an old system that maybe needs to be relooked at. Everything should be based on performance. And so my opinion is if the college degree equates to better performance, then it shouldn't necessarily be a requirement. There should be a tryout for the officer ranks that doesn't have anything to do with a college degree, and anyone that can demonstrate the best performance should be an officer. So I actually put that in the book. And I think that might actually alleviate a lot of the tension there, because then you know for sure the people that are officers have demonstrated they're better performers, right? Vice, you got a college degree and got through the training, so now you're in charge of people that have a lot more experience than you. I think the reason the divide between officer and enlisted exists is just so that you can attract talent from the civilian world to go straight into a leadership role, because if you got to work from the ground up, you may not be able to attract some of the better talent. But I don't think that that's enough to negate the need for ironing out that division that was described. So that's not your question, but I felt the need to say that. Number two, the answer to where I got to, you know, breaking point. Bottom line is I had grown disenfranchised for almost 17 years. And I try and spell that out in the book. The first half is my 17 years where I walked the reader through where I was getting disenfranchised and I kept questioning things. But the problem is when you're young, you think this doesn't make sense, but there must be something I don't understand. I just lack the experience. And even though this is so fundamentally wrong, that I can't be the only one that observes it. There's all these professionals. So obviously someone else out there knows something that I don't, because clearly picking up trash on the side of the road in Ramadi when there's IEDs everywhere doesn't make sense to someone else. But I you know, there's no way I'm the only one that sees this, right? And so this went on and went on and went on. And I think really where I started getting really upset was the year before my battalion command. I was a regimental operations officer. And it's just the ridiculousness of the staff officer work reached new highs. And had just happened to coincide with the time where Lloyd Austin was coming in and saying the biggest threat to the DoD was COVID, while we were trying to withdraw from the longest war, while Russia's staging on the border of Ukraine. And you know, then I started seeing all the general officers that were taking the lucrative post-career positions. And I was mad. But then when the suicide vest attack happened, that was the straw. And I just knew that senior general officers not only wouldn't take accountability, but that would try to weaponize the media and spin it as a success. And I just decided I couldn't remain complacent in the system anymore, hence made the video.
Semper Fi. Hoorah. You answered the question beautifully. And thank you. That was a rough day. I've had treatment for PTS, 9/11 first responder. And my wife that day, you know, when the news broke, she was like, man, I haven't seen you this upset in so long. Yeah. So it sounds like you and I both had a rough day that day. That's right. And so did a lot of others. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. And go Bearcats.
That's right.
Thanks, Johnny. That was a great question. Teresa.
Hey guys, it's a little bit dark in here, so I apologize for the poor lighting. There's my husband. Say hi, Harry.
Why me? What happened?
Yeah. So anyway, I just want to say hello to Stu. And I think my main question is, I think that the active duty still have a responsibility, and the responsibility that I feel the active duty have is to use their First Amendment rights, and Stu knows all this, to fight for change, because we're still on the front lines. I mean, I'm in a NATO command, and yes, I could be called upon in case Russia does something, because this is, of course, the most relevant theater. But more so generally, what is it that you have your advice? And I know I asked this on your podcast, but I think it's good for the audience to hear this as well. What is it your advice for people who are still serving, who want to speak out and think that, oh, I can't speak out because I'm not allowed. My boss is going to get upset. I can't say anything about Afghanistan, or I can't say anything about toxic leadership, or I can't say anything about sexual harassment, or any of the issues that are going on. Stu, what's your advice for those people?
Yeah, good question, Teresa. Good to see you again. You know, this is a tough one. I know Teresa is in the camp where we should completely allow freedom of speech on social media. And, you know, there's a hypocrisy here, because the senior military leaders use social media to push all their messages to the force nowadays. And
they do.
So when I, as an officer, use social media, everyone's like, I can't believe an officer would use social media. But like those old dinosaurs are too clueless to realize that our senior leaders are actually using it to push information down. It was
do the same thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
It was like the first time they'd seen an officer pushing information up. And so these older people that just don't see how it works now were at a loss. What I'll say, though, is like in any system, I mean, take the military out of it. If you're in the corporate world and you get on social media and say, my boss is an idiot, I mean, you better be prepared for the ramifications of such a statement. And so there's a fine line. Like if you actually, there's a couple podcasts really research this. If you go back and look at my social media or my YouTube and some of the deeper things before this, I started creeping up to this. I mean, I was making statements that were on the cusp. And it's interesting because I didn't start my social media until 2018. I was a major. I had no social media before that. And the only reason I started it in 2018 was because I started a business, and it was a military related product. And so that small base that I had was all really young military entrepreneurs, which is why it was enough of a base to catch fire when I eventually posted. But once I got on social media and realized that it's a tool, a lot of military officers are scared of social media because of, you know, just look at my situation. If they post the wrong thing, it can go bad. But staying ignorant, like staying away from social media because there's risk to it, I think there's also risk in that. Like you have to be informed enough to kind of have the pulse of what's being spread on social media. While social media can be echo chambers of our own views, it can also be a place that allows truth that you don't hear anywhere else. So like it's incumbent on you to kind of filter through that. And so,
but Stu, you never called out your bosses directly. And no, I think that's an important point. You were calling out policies. And I think that we in the military, I don't give a shit if you work for Amazon or you work for eBay, you can call out corporate responsibility. You can call out legislative policies that affect how Amazon is going in a certain way. And by all means, we live in a country that guarantees freedom of speech. And if we want to continue to preserve those freedoms, then I feel I'm very passionate about this, but I feel very strongly that those freedoms should be protected. Yeah. And it's not about your particular work center or your boss or your particular environment or anything. It is about the overarching policies that guide how you do business. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, to your point, any system that allows bottom-up feedback, honest feedback, if they can absorb that, they will be better, quicker, and it'll help the system evolve faster. So no doubt that is helpful. You know, just look at Ford on the factory line, taking all its employees' feedback on how to make the machine line faster. And then, you know, you save these billions of dollars ground up. I mean, that's how you do that. And right now the military publication and article system is just, it's not nowhere close to where it needs to be to have honest, timely, accurate assessment of what's going on. And so social media could be the answer to that. But, you know, the answer to what we're discussing right now is somewhere in the middle. You got to have some type of tact and decorum and ability to not say you're a effing idiot and I'm going to bring the system down, right? Like I probably went too far with that one, right? But you still should be able to say, like, I demand accountability of my senior leaders. Like that initial statement absolutely should be able to stand on its own merit to make the system better. So I hope there's people like you that can help evolve those policies, but you know better than anyone else, like things don't move very quick in the military.
No, they don't. But I'm in for the long haul, at least for the next 2 years while I'm at NATO. And I'll continue to beat that drum and stand on it and be proud of it. So I appreciate what you're doing, Stu. And you know, I'm forever your supporter. Thank you.
Teresa, you're amazing. You are so courageous to me too. I mean, you know, along, of course, Stu, you are absolutely courageous to me also. So Stu is on Teresa Carpenter's podcast. I listened to that and I really enjoyed that. So just a plug for that. Thank you. Scott.
Hey, thanks, Sarah. Hey, Stu, thanks for your time today. I can imagine how how busy you really are. A smart move to take that break you took to kind of get ready for your, you know, the onslaught here with interviews and in your time. Thank you for your service as a Marine, as a man who stood up for what he believed was the right thing to do. That takes courage. I was fortunate to retire at 21 years, but you know, without getting into that whole story, I made a decision to leave, and some of it was based on, and this is in 2012. Some of it was based on things that were happening with leadership that I disagreed with, and so I had the comfort of being able to walk away with a retirement. So that's a whole different story. But I think the premise was kind of aligned with why you decided to leave. And through my career, I always felt that I had an obligation to speak up when I thought something wasn't right, even if it didn't necessarily go along with, you know, what everyone else was thinking. And I did. And there's a way to do it, obviously, as you know, when you're doing what you're doing. But I never opted not to say what I felt was required, because, you know, you owe your commander or your boss a viewpoint that is legitimate, and sometimes you just got to say what you got to say, right? And in my senior time as a major and lieutenant colonel, the curtain was pulled back again, kind of getting back to what you're saying. When you're younger, you just think, well, hey, these are a lot of smart folks. They must be something else. And then you get up and you see some of the things that are happening, and you see senior folks that are just kind of turning their heads. And it's like, wait a minute. What about this? What about that? And then you're told to get into your box. And that's like, okay, it doesn't work that way. It shouldn't work that way. Getting back to the courage aspect of what you did, I can see that. It's interesting when you talk about things that you remember in your life when certain things happen, whether it's something as incredibly important as 9/11, that attack. Where were you when that happened? I can remember exactly where I was when I saw your video. And to me, that was a very seminal, like, oh my gosh, here we have a Marine officer coming out and saying this. And it shocked the hell out of a lot of people. It did me too. And I didn't know how to take it at first. At first I was like, and I know you don't remember this, but I shot you a DM and I said, hey, brother, on LinkedIn, I said, if you want to talk, give me a call. And of course, you had a lot going on, and you had probably close friends and other folks that wanted to chat with you as well. So, but as time went on, I started to really think about what you were saying, and then putting together the why and the courage. Again, I keep using that word. We talk about honor, courage, and commitment in the Marine Corps. I think you were that. You were absolutely that. And you sacrificed more than what most of us will sacrifice. It is comfortable to retire, but when you're 3 years away and you make the decision that you made to walk away from it for the purpose that you did, that says a lot about you as a man. And I some of the questions I had have kind of been mulled over, so I don't really have a question for you. I just want to let you know that as a fellow Marine and as a fellow officer, I thank you again for your service and for the greater service that you're doing to our country now, because we need to hear this. People need to stand up. There's a lot happening, and it's not just within the military, but it's systemic in our system as well. The way leaders are not held accountable, but people are getting tired of it, and we need change. And there's a lot of ways to go about it. I'm a fan for what you're doing, and I'm thankful.
I appreciate
I'll leave it there.
I know you didn't directly ask the question, but a couple of things I want to comment on that you said there. First of all, the fact that you said you weren't sure what to make of it, and then as you contemplated on it, kind of came to a deeper understanding, like that means more than anything. And it's funny also that you said that you messaged me right when it happened. Yeah, I didn't respond to any of those messages. I mean, I got probably 5,000 messages, but what's really been funny is now that the book's come out, some of those people that only messaged me once right after my first video or second video didn't get a response and then went calm silent. Now that they've read the book, have messaged me again, and now I have time to reply to them. And it's funny to watch that, just similar to you, kind of like their initial statement, like, oh, hey. And now that they've read the book, it's kind of, they have a deeper appreciation. And that means a lot to me. I mean, Teresa asked the last question. I don't think Teresa was on my team either there in the beginning. Go back and watch some of her earlier podcasts. And what I did, like some of those podcasters, I reached out to the people that disagreed with me first and said, bring me on your show. Like, I want to have this healthy debate, because I feel like there's a lack of information out there on what I was trying to achieve. And then, you know, you also brought up, you always kind of told bosses what they didn't want to hear if that was the right way. What I'll tell you is, you know, you and me have similar experiences as a major and a lieutenant colonel. Every commander that I've ever had has said that they want honest feedback. They all say that, but there's a different threshold for that feedback for each commander. And so, like, as a staff officer or as a subordinate, you almost have to like feel it out. And, you know, I've had some where that threshold was very thin. Like if I disagreed with them in a meeting or anything publicly, they took me aside and reprimanded me and let me know that I was never supposed to do that again. And so, yeah, I do think we should be giving honest feedback, but that's not the case with every commander. And you have to almost, as a subordinate, figure out, do I just be a yes man, or do I get the lowest fit rep, or what do I do here? And so it's a little bit challenging at times.
Right. That's a great point. I mean, I saw the exact same thing, because people are different, right? It's just like when you talk about, you know, folks that are in the military getting on and talking like we're talking now, you know, active duty folks, you know, you have to kind of gauge the audience, and you have to be smart about what it is you say and why you're saying it, because people will either take things out of context or they'll just see it differently. And commanders are the same way. I had commanders that were absolutely, if you told them what you thought, they listened and they would thank you. And, you know, whether or not they did anything that you were asking them to do or whatever, that's up to them, right? You know, they're the guy or gal that's in charge. But there were some that absolutely, you know, actually said, you'd had to be very, you had a very thin margin for, you know, that pushback. And the thing that really drove me towards it's time to retire was, and I won't get into the details because of people, you know, because it could cause a problem for some possibly, but there was an event where a Marine got sent back for some things that were out of control. And no one did anything about it. They just got him out of theater. No one wanted to talk about it. And that Marine belonged to me. He was one of the Marines that was in a company. I was an inspector instructor. So he was a reserve Marine. And my boss picked up the phone and said, what are you doing? Why are you pushing this? And I said, come on. Is that a serious question? Knowing what you know, you're okay with nothing being done? And then he started, I said, well, you know what? You're not the commander, I am. You've been a commander. You commanded at the battalion level. You commanded at the regimental level. This is my time. And, the way the system works on the I&I side as the battalion commander, the general who is the reserve commander is not your reporting senior. The chief of staff for that higher, that colonel is your boss. And so I'll say this much. I was surprised that he didn't, kick me square in the running lights with some of the things I pushed back on him. So I'll give him that much. But, and I pushed forward with, what I felt needed to happen. But it came at a cost. And so that kind of wrapped up into why it was time for me to go, because not enough people, even people at the major and captain level, didn't want to get involved. I think they were afraid to get involved. And that pissed me off. It's like, that's not the way things work. Shouldn't work that way. But I digress. But again, hey, thank you, Stu. Semper Fi, brother.
Semper Fi, brother.
Thanks, Scott. Sean, I'm going to get right back to you. I want to pull Scott Rathke because he was not here for the introductions. We'll get right back to you, Sean. Okay. Scott Rathke.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Stu. Thanks for coming on. I missed the first part of it, but it's been a pleasure listening to your comments, to the questions, and just for background, Navy SEAL, 20 years, getting ready to retire in December here. So coming up. So we're roughly same year group area we're peers, as I would say. And I have spent my entire career as a SEAL, and I can see where you're coming from with a lot of the things that you mentioned. What Johnny Walker talked about, officer and enlisted relationships. I have seen, even in my own community, a dynamic of the trust, but obviously special ops, it's a little different. But I have seen, what Johnny was talking about. So I concur with your thoughts on that relationship and how it has to be balanced there. And I was in Iraq in 2018 at the very end, and that was when the president, then President Trump, decided to withdraw us from Syria, and that was a tough moment. And I was obviously the Special Operations Deputy Commander of the Spec Ops team, so we had about 2,000 folks in Syria, and so me and my which was a MARSOC colonel, we decided we had to come up with a plan to get us to withdraw. Meanwhile, Jim Mattis resigns. Meanwhile, all these things were going on in the background. Well, we got to get our people out of there, and we couldn't really kind of do much about that. So I've seen the debacles that you're talking about. I've seen the things that there are variables that are out there, that are so many things that we don't know behind curtain doors, and the decision makers. And I don't have all the answers to that. I mean, we're talking at the Secretary of Defense and a 4-star level of like really caught on the heels of to like what they were told to do. As far as your balance of freedom of speech, I think there has to be a balance. I mean, I think the freedom of speech is obviously granted. It's part of our First Amendment right. I also know that there's a superior and a subordinate piece to it. So it's like there has to be some sort of like balance with that. And I'm not sure what the right thing is with the social media. I haven't been on social media most of my career. Obviously, Spec Ops is refrained from being on those devices. And actually, we signed letters and saying that we're not going to be on them. But those are, not speaking up is very common, whether it be medically, whether it be through leadership, anything that we're talking about speaking up. If like Johnny Walker had mentioned PTSD, and if he had said that to his platoon commander or his major, there's more than likely that person's going to get pulled off the ranks and thrown into the medical pool. I would be curious to your thoughts on, if you did the video again, would you do it in uniform?
Yeah, good question. Appreciate everything you just said. I think the first video, I wouldn't change anything. So the first video, I did it in uniform intentionally because I was trying to have the maximum effect. So the question you're asking is really, could you have saved yourself by not being in uniform? And the answer is probably. I probably could have avoided it, at least the next day firing, had I been in civilian clothes. But then it wouldn't have had the reach and started the conversation, which was really the whole point of the endeavor. And quite honestly, had I done it in civilian clothes, if I'd have gotten still a couple thousand shares, they probably still would have relieved me. But the difference would be they would have sat me down and allowed an investigation to take place rather than just relieving me immediately. And so, there wouldn't have been as much of a get rid of him, silence him now type mentality from the system. So I think I had to be in uniform on the first video. The only thing I'd go back and change is probably that school bus video where I was just so mad and I was emotional and I allowed that to derail some of my rational arguments. And, but it's like when you're trying to like run through a minefield, man, you might hit some mines, but you keep trying to move forward. Right. And so like I hit some mines, but I was never down for the count. I kept moving forward. I stayed on point with what my original message was. And, in a lot of ways, like even my mistakes brought attention to the situation, which was what I was trying to do. And so it wasn't all bad. And so I don't regret anything. If there's ways I could tweak it, I would, but you can't. So you stay looking forward.
I appreciate that, Stu. And if there's anything I can do for you, please, would love to chat more.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, please hit me up.
Cool. Thank you. Sean.
Hello, I'm back. Thank you for sharing that, Scott, Ratke, and Stu. I've got a question for you, but real quick, can I just share, Scott? You mentioned you're at 20 years. I think we look pretty decent for a couple of decades in the military, and it's sending us all over the world doing all sorts of things. I think we've done all right. We drink water and drive on. Good, I think we're doing all right. Okay, question. All right, so it's good to decompress, in my opinion. I mean the military's opinion. Stress and challenges, and we're going through all that stuff. Humor helps to decompress through the challenging, difficult times. I'd like to kind of pick your brain, since we're all here together, about decompressing, how to de-stress and decompress. Like after one thing that I've found after my injury, about a year after I'd gotten out of the hospital, and I was in comas and having seizures and stuff like that, and then about a year I got back. And then I'm like, everything, we were doing the withdrawal from Afghanistan then. So there was a lot going on. And I was trying to figure out, okay, this is a lot. Who am I? Where am I? What's going on? What happened? There was a lot. So one thing that I found is I find that if I do service to help my brothers and sisters, it takes the focus off of my challenges and it helps others. I got a message saying that they were looking for folks to help out with the Afghans, where I served in Afghanistan, and they were looking for folks to help with the withdrawal and everything. I know there's a lot of emotion with that, but they needed people, and I'm like, well, I'm still in therapy right now. It's 2 years out, and I just got out of the hospital and everything, and so, but I went back to Fort Bliss, where the Army sent me for a year, and I helped out with the Afghans to help out with the refugees. So I served with the Army in a non-military capacity. I worked with International Rescue Committee, Just Serve, and folks like that. And it was interesting because like I was learning. I'm still in therapy for speaking, and I was working with the interpreters and stuff that were there. And so I was able to speak some Dari Pashtun that Sean 1.0 had picked up. I'd learned a lot of language, but I was trying to learn English, and I was trying to get Dari Pashtun and everything. So it was special, heartwarming. One of the most beautiful parts of it was there's some kids that were there, and they're never going to see their homes again, yada yada, politics and everything that. But it's beautiful for these poor kids that will never see their home. They drew a picture of an American flag by an Afghan flag with all this terrible, awful things going on. They they made this beautiful picture of an American flag by an Afghan flag, and that's a beautiful thing. Like there's hope, and I have, that's one of my favorite parts of life, is there is hope. And so I want to pick your brain. What, with all the stuff that's gone on, the chaos, the rain, the storms, the mayhem, what is it that you find to decompress the stress?
For me, working out is almost a requirement. We talked, somebody earlier mentioned talking about issues and how it's hard to do it in the service. I agree with that. I've struggled with anxiety my whole life, and anxiety is one of those things where it's almost got a negative connotation, but all high performers, I think, struggle with anxiety, right? Anxiety is what gets you going. And sometimes having too much of it has negative effects. So I have to work out. I mean, it's the only way that clears my head. Actually, oftentimes I go to the gym and I'll get on the treadmill, and after 10 minutes, I'll have this great idea, and then I'll run back to my house because I want to write down or lean into whatever that idea is, but it doesn't really come until I get into the gym. So that's number one. Number two is just disconnecting from electronics. So there's times where my kids will come for the weekend and I'll just put my electronics completely away and just focus on being absorbed with them. So those are probably the two biggest ones, working out and not electronics. Sometimes I'll go have some beers with my friends. That's probably a third way, but as we all know, that can be a dangerous, slippery slope. So you got to keep that kind of in check, but done correctly, it can be helpful. So that's what I do.
Thank you for sharing that. I hope this doesn't rabbit hole, but I'm an oddball in a lot of ways. I identify with question marks, and so I love the working out and disconnecting from electronics. And I'm an oddball because I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we don't drink. And so I'm an oddball in the police world and the military world because we don't drink. And so I go and hang out with my friends that, but I'm the designated driver almost all the time, and it's great. And I get to, in Germany or whatever it was, I get to go and keep everyone, protected and safe. It's great. It's good times. Again, humor is good, helps to decompress the challenges. And sometimes I'm inappropriate with my humor, but I do have a traumatic brain injury, so there's that. So I'm sorry, but thank you for sharing that. I wrote down those items. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Paul.
Two things real quick. The first is that, in all candor, I am with Teresa Carpenter when it comes to regards to First Amendment rights. And I understand from Stu the value, and from Scott the value of not being a name caller. And I think Teresa mentioned this as well. We talk about policy versus being a name caller or being accusatory. I think that stands in good stead. The second point I want to make is that I do computer forensics and cyber forensics. And I know that there are people from other countries who watch everything that we say over here. And they are not necessarily what I would call the pillars of society. Some of these folks are flat out evil. And so in the use of social media, where it's available to you, and it's available in a lot of places, but where it's available to you, using end-to-end encryption has a lot of value. And my only concern is that people who aren't on our side, who don't have our best interest at heart, are taking this information and compiling it along with a bunch of other information and using that against us. End of story. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll pile on and say I agree with everything you just said. We absolutely have to be cognizant of that. But I think sometimes I fall into so I had a lot of death threats that came through my phone, a lot of weird stuff. Like somebody once sent me a text quoting back the conversation that I had just had in my private residence as like a scare tactic to let me know that they were listening to me, right? Like real weird. And so I could have, and I've got Signal, I've got all the end-to-end encryption stuff. I could have just completely dropped off my phone number. But the other part of me is like, with all of that risk, when you tighten the tunnel, you also block out a lot of the good too. So, I have all the stuff. And so the way I've approached it is you just got to be mindful, to your point. You got to make sure you're not putting stuff out there that you don't want everyone to have. When you want it to be secret, you need to be using the end-to-end encryption stuff. But I also don't want to swing too far by letting the threats dictate all our action. You just got to be mindful of it.
I will point out one thing to you, Stu, and that is that I remember when you received those threats. And you and I had an exchange, and you gave me a couple of phone numbers, and I ran them to ground. I don't know if you ever got my response to that or not with the 5,000 emails you were getting, but these people were such cowards that they used throwaway phones that they paid cash for. There was no record of who owned that phone or who was in control of it. And that's the kind of thing that just piles on to everything else that you've had to go through. And so, yeah, you're right. There are ways to escape that, but you don't want to surrender your life in the process of doing that.
I didn't realize this was you, man. This whole time, you never said anything. Yeah, I remember talking to you. This was awesome. Good to see you.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay. And we've got Glenn and then Hunter, and then I can end us out unless somebody else has a comment. So Glenn.
Okay, mine's going to be quick. First, Lieutenant Commander, I wanted to say I have an immense amount of respect for you. I've had moments in my career which pale by comparison with the decision that you made. But where, as one of my Navy customers told me, I had to throw my body across the railroad track to stop an oncoming train. So I really respect the character and the courage and the resolve it took to make the decision that you did. So the question I had for you is there a person or an event in your life that you think may have had the biggest impact on the character that you've developed to make that decision?
Good question. I think the person or people that should be attributed to my character the most is my parents. My mom, it's funny, is really the aggressive one, and my dad's kind of the happy-go-lucky one. So they kind of balance out characteristics that I have. So I have a little bit of both of them. But my father was like penniless 24-year-old in the middle of Illinois, and he worked his way up and is fairly wealthy now, and it's just through hard work. And so I think I always realized as a young kid, we moved around a lot as my dad was traveling from firm to firm, that everything has to be hard work. And our generation was kind of fed a lie in a lot of ways. Go to college and there'll be these high paying jobs waiting for you on the backside. And we've all kind of come to realize that that's not true at this point. But back when I was 23, that was like everyone believed it. And I think why I've, come to realize is people just like lost sight of hard work. Nothing is just given to you. And it's almost like people develop this sense of entitlement. If I go to college and I get my degree, they're going to hand me this high paying job. And I'll also point out that when I go around and do all these book tours and do these different speaking events, the people that like really fundamentally love America and what it stands for often are like 1 or 2 year immigrants, have been here recently. And it's like the 5th, 6th generation Americans like have lost all perspective. And I go back to, I think the perspective they've lost is the amount of hard work that our founding fathers and different people put in the beginning. And so it's like that quality of work ethic, in my opinion, is more important than how smart you are, what degree you have, all these other things. Like those things are valuable, but they're only made successful through hard work. And so if there's one piece of my character that I got from my parents, it was that. I grew up in Ohio, but before that we were in St. Louis and we lived on a farm, and it's misleading because my dad's a corporate insurance guy, but they like bought a farm just because like that's like what they wanted to do. And so like I was like cleaning horse pastures every day as like a 7-year-old, and I hate horses to this day because all I did was clean horse pastures. But like looking back, that was good for me, right? And so I'd say my parents.
Cool, great answer. Yeah, I can relate to some of the things that you said too. I worked on a turkey farm when I was in high school. It was one of my first jobs. So I don't think it gets any worse than that, but but that helps build character. It helps build character because you learn to appreciate when hard work actually creates reward. The other thing I'll mention just real quick, I married a Ukrainian girl. Her parents were first generation immigrants from Ukraine. And you want to talk about, starting with nothing, coming to this country, not even being able to speak English, and making a life for themselves. It's really a testimonial to the American story.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Good talking to you, brother.
Yeah, same here.
And Hunter, welcome. Oh, you're muted.
Hey, how are y'all? I just want to say thank you so much, Stu. I graduated from the Citadel right when 2020 was going on, and the topic of you was very, very divisive on campus. Junior officers that look up to you is insane. You had sent me a message during a difficult time, and you probably don't remember it. You said, "Bloom were planted." Simple. I had an officer panel yesterday, and I quoted it right back to a commander. And you're talked about constantly amongst junior officers, amongst Citadel alumni. Most of us don't ever want to see General McKenzie on campus. That's being honest, except the old heads that are grads that support them. And I can honestly say, there's a moment, and I'm so thankful for Tammy. I was going to go viral. I was going to go to the news. I was going to go to LinkedIn, to social media, where I felt so strongly about calling out my senior leadership because it was that bad of a topic. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And after a lot of talks with Tammy and taking some nuggets of knowledge from you, that it kind of gave me that reminder of being tactful. And I guess where the question I have for you is, as somebody going forward, amongst junior officers and enlisted, what is best to toe the line, with being tactful, and when to say, screw it, it's very difficult, when you see some horrific things and you can't bite your tongue any longer. And that's something that I've been going through. And I really resonate with a lot you say, and I respect you, sir.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I understand the question. So This is a really tough question for me to answer because obviously I spoke out, but hopefully you get a chance to read the book. And what I do is I point out there's some really horrendous things that happened to me for my whole career, but obviously I didn't speak out then, right? So it's not like I got to where I was at by saying whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, nor I got to that point with like not observing injustices along the way. And I'll tell you, at any organization, this isn't just military specific, you're going to see problems with your bosses and injustices, right? But what I tell you, and this is how I answer that question because I'm asked it actually a lot. What I do and what I did is I journal a lot. So I'll read books and then I'll write down like small nuggets that I think are insightful. And what I did was I wrote out my values. And so just the process of writing your values helps reflect back what you think to be important. And so what that does is when there's ever a conflict between the system and your individual values, then there's a choice that you can make a little bit more informed. When you don't write down what your values are, and then you come to a point of conflict, what happens is fear drives your actions. And that's what you want to try and avoid is fear. You want to make a rational decision that's not emotionally based, that's in line with your values. And so, speaking out is it's never an easy road. And so before you do anything, I would submit to you, write down what your individual values are. And when you get to a place where you find them in conflict with something, then you need to very rationally, unemotionally make a decision.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I, want to thank everybody for your very, very thoughtful comments. And I would like to share something with you, Stu, as a civilian, somebody who was never connected to the military. I do have a son now who's serving, so all this is, very personal to me now to hear these conversations, like for his welfare too. But for somebody who does not know the rules of the military, how it hit me when you came out is somebody like, I think about how great courage comes from love. And I think about kind of control comes from fear. And I really, that you stood out to me, even though I knew that I didn't know a lot about military rules. And I was very curious about what my military friends thought about it. I feel like from a civilian point of view who sees things out there very nuanced, that's how the world feels to me now. It's very vague, it's muddled, it's not clear. It's hard to get to clarity in having a conversation. When you came out, I feel like in a way that you empowered everybody's courage. Like, okay, yeah, I'm not the only one that thinks that things are muddled and that I don't understand why this is the way it is in leadership or in politics today. Or, we have a few other politicians that are starting to really speak out too. I think on both parties. So I want to thank you for your courage for all of us, for putting everything on the line to empower us all to remember, what truth looks like. So
thank you.
Thank you. And do you want to leave us with any thoughts? What should we walk away from with your talk? What's on your heart here?
I appreciate all of you. There's nothing more. You're looking at me like waiting for something else. That was it. That was my closing.
Okay, I love that. That's great. Doesn't get better than that, does it? Well, Stu, thank you. It's such a pleasure. And just remember us. We are here. We are here offline, online. If you can ever use our platform for anything too in the future, just please connect. So thanks so much. Thanks again.
Sure.
Love you all. Have a great.
Thank you.
I have one quick question.
Say thanks to your parents for raising such a great human being.
I will. All right. Okay. Bye, guys.